I went to Bianjing to seek out my fiancé, whom I had never met, but he only sent a servant to deal with me.
Our young master has been very busy lately and simply cannot spare the time. He has entrusted you, miss, to the care of young Master Zhou. This is the token. You may go find him yourself.
Holding the token given by the servant, I went to find Zhou Huanchao. He was fishing when I found him, looking so sickly that he could barely hold up the fishing rod. I couldn't help but lean in and warn him. Watch the rod. A look of astonishment appeared on his aloof face.
You are the first person who has ever dared to call me that.
The willow catkins of the capital blew all over my face. As I stood outside the Gu family estate, I scolded my unseen fiancé, Gu Yanzhi, 1,000 times. In my mind, 6 months ago, my parents passed away one after another. Clutching the marriage contract signed in our childhood, I traveled thousands of miles, only to end up at the gates of the Gu family, where they wouldn't even let me set foot inside. An arrogant servant came out of the side door. He squinted and sized me up, as if looking at a piece of junk delivered to the wrong place.
Our young master has been very busy lately and simply cannot spare any time,
he said with a curl of his lip. He pulled a jade pendant and a letter from his sleeve.
The young master has entrusted you to young Master Zhou's care. This is the token. Go there yourself. Entrusted?
What a choice of words. It made me sound like a pet, or a basket of broken eggs and rotten vegetables being dropped off. In her 16 years of life, Tian Tang was learning for the first time that she could actually be pawned off like this, but under someone else's roof. One has to accept their lot. Clutching the jade pendant, I asked around for a long time and finally found that young Master Zhou by the Willow River bank in the east of the city. Zhou Huanchao. It was a grand-sounding name, sounding like, but as I looked at his back by the river from afar, I couldn't help but stop in my tracks. A young man in a light-colored robe was leaning against an old willow tree, holding a fishing rod in his hand. The March breeze was still a bit chilly, yet he only wore a thin cloak. The cool wind fluttered the hem of his robe, making it seem as if he might fly away with the wind at any moment. The fishing rod trembled precariously in his hand, as if it would slip into the water in the next second. The young servant beside him was pacing around anxiously.
Young master, let's go back. Given your health.
No matter. Cough, cough.
His voice was as light as a willow catkin brushing across a lake.
Fishing calms the mind. Cough. Cough.
Before he could finish, the fishing line underwater suddenly went taut. With no strength in his wrist, Zhou Huanchao let go, and the rod flew out, sliding across the surface of the water. Without a second thought, I rushed forward with quick strides, grabbed the handle of the rod firmly for him, and yelled out, "Watch the rod." The surroundings instantly fell dead silent. The catkins stopped floating, the birds stopped singing, and even the ripples on the water seemed to have come to a complete standstill. Zhou Huanchao slowly turned his head, and only then did I get a clear look at his face. His features were delicate, like winter snow on a mountain. The corners of his eyes tilted up slightly. His nose was high and straight, and his thin lips had a faint pink hue due to his illness. He looked like a frail, handsome young man, yet his eyes were deep and bottomless. He stared at me for a long while. He suddenly smiled.
You are the very first person who has ever dared to address me like that.
Ah.
My darling.
A subtle, inscrutable smile played at the corners of his lips.
You called me my darling.
I, Tian Tang, swear to heaven. I had just said watch the rod. As in a fishing rod. Not darling as in a term of endearment. After Zhou Huanchao finished reading the letter, he looked at the jade pendant again and finally shifted his gaze back to me.
Gu Yanzhi has settled you here with me.
His tone was flat when he said this, but I noticed his fingers tightened slightly on the letter before releasing it immediately.
You may stay here at the Zhou residence for now.
He stood up, his light-colored outer robe fluttering in the breeze. He looked as thin and fragile as a sheet of paper. Qingju hurriedly stepped forward to support him, muttering in a low voice.
Young master, you've stayed outside too long today. It is time to go back and take your medicine.
Zhou Huanchao ignored him, only turning to glance at me.
Let's go, my darling.
It is watch the rod.
Understood, my darling.
And so, I moved into the Zhou residence. The Zhou residence was located at the end of Willow Lane in the east of the city. It wasn't very large, but it was exquisite in every detail. The corridors wound gracefully, the plants and trees flourished, and a small pond was tucked away behind the rockery, where a few red koi were kept. I was settled in a south-facing room. Opening the window, I could see a wall covered with Chinese roses. The sun bathed the room from morning till night. It was separated from Zhou Huanchao's courtyard by only a circular archway. On the first night, I tossed and turned on the bed, unable to sleep. It wasn't because I was picky about the bed. Compared to the one I slept on for 16 years back home, than the one I had slept on for 16 years in my hometown. The bedding was newly bought, carrying a faint scent of soap. The height and firmness of the pillows were just right, and twin lotus seed pods were embroidered on the mosquito net. It was so gorgeous that I didn't even dare to touch it. The reason I couldn't sleep was because of the emptiness in my heart. When on earth would Gu Yanzhi come to take me away? I was afraid of losing the betrothal, and even more afraid of losing a home. As my mind wandered in these thoughts, a soft, muffled cough suddenly drifted from the neighboring courtyard. I tilted my head to listen closely. It was indeed Zhou Huanchao. The coughing wasn't loud, as if he were deliberately holding it back, keeping it stifled in his chest, unwilling to let it out. Yet one cough followed another, completely unstoppable. After a moment's hesitation, I put on my clothes, got up, and followed the sound. The door to Zhou Huanchao's room wasn't fully closed, and a dim, flickering light spilled out. I knocked lightly on the door. "Young Master Zhou." The coughing stopped abruptly. After a short pause, his voice drifted from inside the room, carrying a trace of dry hoarseness.
Come in.
I pushed the door open and entered. He was reclining on the couch, draped in a thin blanket, holding a book in his hand. The firelight illuminated his face. His features were as cold and proud as ice. On the small table beside the couch sat a bowl of soup medicine, which had long since gone stone cold. A thin skin had formed over the surface of the medicine. He hadn't even taken his medicine. I picked up the bowl, and the rim felt freezing cold to my fingertips. "Let me warm this up for you."
No need. It makes no difference whether I take it or not.
"How can you say that?" Ignoring his protests, I carried the medicine bowl out of the room. The charcoal fire was still burning in the kitchen. I poured the medicine into a small clay pot to warm it up. After thinking for a moment, I also picked up a small plate of sweet preserved plums. When I returned to the room, Zhou Huanchao was still in the same position as before, except the book was now resting on his lap, and his gaze was fixed on the empty air, as if he were lost in thought. "Look. The medicine is warmed up." I handed the bowl to him. "Drink it all in one gulp, and then have a plum to get rid of the bitter taste." He looked at the bowl of medicine, then at the plate of plums.
You are very thoughtful.
My father was a physician. I grew up preparing herbs and brewing medicine for him, so I'm used to it. Zhou Huanchao took the bowl, tilted his head back, and drank the medicine in one gulp. His throat moved as he swallowed, and his brow furrowed slightly. He clearly found it very bitter. I quickly popped a plum into his mouth, just as I used to do for my mother before she passed away. The moment I did it, I felt a pang of regret. I wasn't even well acquainted with Zhou Huanchao yet. Such an action was far too intimate. I quickly tried to smooth things over. "Please forgive my rudeness. I'm just used to feeding plums to my mother." His brow gradually smoothed out.
It is fine. It is very sweet.
"Yes, bitter medicine should be paired with something sweet. That is a tradition passed down in my family." The firelight reflected in his eyes, like a fallen star in deep water.
Little Miss Tian,
"Yes?"
you are quite amusing.
The firelight flickered, casting our shadows onto the wall. The two dark silhouettes seemed to lean against each other, with their heads close together. Even though Gu Yanzhi had entrusted me to Zhou Huanchao, to the Zhou family, I was just another mouth to feed. But I had my pride, and I didn't want to live off of charity. On my second day at the Zhou household, I couldn't bring myself to sit idle. There were countless books in Zhou Huanchao's room, but the top shelf was covered in a thin layer of dust. When the sunlight hit it, it was an eyesore. I asked Qingju for a rag. Qingju looked a bit hesitant.
Miss Tian, the servants can handle this kind of work.
"It is all right. I'm just lending a hand." I rolled up my sleeves, tied my apron, and began to clean. I pulled over a chair and stepped onto it, standing on my tiptoes to reach the very top shelf. Just as my fingers touched the spine of a book, the chair beneath me suddenly wobbled. My entire body fell backward. "Oh no!" Before a gasp of surprise could escape my throat, I fell into a firm embrace. One hand held my waist securely, while the other held my shoulder tightly. A faint scent of herbal medicine wafted from behind me, mingled with the aroma of ink from the books. I turned my head and met a cold, handsome face. Without my realizing it, Zhou Huanchao had stood up behind me. With his head slightly raised, the sharp line of his jaw looked clean and defined in the sunlight. His hand was still wrapped around my waist.
If you can't reach, call for help.
His voice came from above me, very soft, yet I caught a barely perceptible trace of nervousness in it. Only then did I realize that my entire body was nestled in his embrace. I could feel the slight rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. His heart was beating faster than I expected. I could feel it through our layers of clothing. Thump, thump, thump. I can reach it. I tried to free myself from his embrace and stand up, but my foot suddenly slipped. He pulled me back with a sudden surge of strength, and we both fell heavily onto the floor.
Don't move.
Zhou Huanchao's voice sounded somewhat deep and husky at this moment. I could only sit obediently on him, my cheeks already burning hot. At this moment, sunlight filtered through the window, falling upon us, as the shadows of the bookshelf intertwined us together.
Ahem, ahem.
A cough sounded from the doorway. Qingju, the attendant, was standing there holding a tea tray, his eyes darting around. His gaze swept over Zhou Huanchao's hand holding my waist, and he quickly looked up at the ceiling.
Young master, I really didn't see anything just now. Since the medicine has gone cold, should I go reheat it for a while? Maybe heat it for a bit longer.
Only then did Zhou Huanchao slowly release my waist. His perfectly calm and composed demeanor made it seem as though Qingju was the one worrying over nothing.
You talk too much.
Qingju replied cheerfully.
You are right, young master. Then I shall go brew the medicine now.
But unexpectedly, he suddenly turned back, poking his head into the room and shouting to me.
Miss Tian, my young master has an injury on his waist. Please make sure you don't sit on him for too long.
Get out.
Hearing this, Qingju quickly slipped away with the tray. The entire study instantly fell into silence. Zhou Huanchao stood up and helped me up, his reddened earlobes hidden among his hair, faintly visible. Then he set the chair upright.
In the future, before stepping onto a stool, check if there is anyone around to catch you.
His fist hanging at his side clenched slightly. Young Master Zhou.
Speak.
Just now. How did you appear so quickly?
Just passing by.
Just then, Qingju's muttering came from the hallway, faintly saying,
Young master, you stood watch at the door for almost an hour, just standing there refusing to go in.
Qingju.
How rare. Zhou Huanchao actually had the energy to shout so loudly. More than half a month passed, and Qingju kept asking me to deliver the herbal medicine to Zhou Huanchao.
The medicine I bring, the young master always refuses to drink. Miss Tian, you are different. You are a guest. He would feel too embarrassed to refuse you.
I handed the medicine to Zhou Huanchao again. He looked at the dark liquid in the bowl and spoke slowly.
Since Gu Yanzhi entrusted you to me, you are not a servant of this household. There is no need for you to do chores in the future.
I lowered my head. Then what should I do? It is not right to receive benefits for nothing. I understood this basic principle. Zhou Huanchao probably thought I was being too wordy. He took the medicine, took a small sip, and frowned slightly. It seemed the medicine was indeed very bitter.
Just keep me company.
Keep you company?
Yes. Stay by my side when I take my medicine. When I read, just sit nearby.
He paused for a moment, his eyes fixed on the dark medicine in the bowl as he said,
This place is too quiet. Since you arrived, it is nice to have a little life around.
Looking at his furrowed brow, I suddenly felt that this patient wasn't as cold as he appeared. All right, I'll keep you company. But you still must finish this bowl of medicine first. He looked down at the remaining half bowl of medicine, then looked up at me.
Too bitter.
Since when is medicine sweet? Hurry up and drink it. I'll give you some candied fruit when you're done. A sudden gleam flashed in his eyes. He looked up and gulped down the rest of the medicine. Then frowning, he held his hand out to me.
Hand it over, the candied fruit.
I handed him the dried apricot. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. He leaned forward and bit the fruit from my fingertips.
Tian Tang.
Yeah?
From now on, you must watch me take my medicine.
Why is that? He looked away. His voice sounded incredibly soft and airy.
When you're watching me, it doesn't taste as bitter.
During my second month of living there, I noticed Zhou Huanchao barely touched his food, even with a table full of dishes, like velvet chicken slices, crab roe tofu, and steamed sea bass. He would only take a single bite before stopping, as if he were just going through the motions. Most of the time, he would leisurely sip his tea, watching Qingju clear away the untouched food. You can't go on without eating. You're already sick. If you don't eat a few more bites, how will your body ever recover?
I have no appetite.
Is the food not to your liking?
It all tastes the same to me.
A sudden pang of sadness hit my chest. My father once told me that if a person can no longer taste their food, it means their digestion and vitality are completely ruined. Just how long had Zhou Huanchao been sick? He had actually grown so weak that he had lost his sense of taste entirely. This reminded me of my father. His favorite dish in the world was the bamboo shoot and pork soup my mother made. Every spring, when the bamboo shoots sprouted from the earth, he would stand right by the stove, waiting for the steam to rise. The delicious aroma would drift far away with the wind. Later, when my father fell gravely ill, he couldn't swallow anything except for half a bowl of my mother's soup, which he could barely manage. I set down my chopsticks. Zhou Huanchao, wait for me for a bit.
Wait for you? What do you plan to do?
I'm going to show off my skills for you. It is my mother's specialty, bamboo shoot and pork soup. My father loved it the most. I gestured excitedly as I spoke. The broth is milky white, and it tastes so savory that you won't even want to swallow. Once you taste it, maybe you'll find your appetite again. He just stared at me like that, a faint glimmer of light appearing in his deep, calm eyes.
All right.
The next morning, I slipped out of the house carrying a basket on my back. I had heard from the kitchen auntie that the spring bamboo shoots from Mount Kipping outside the city were of the best quality. In April, the mountains were shrouded in thick mist. I climbed up along the narrow path. Sure enough, I found a dense forest on the shaded side of the mountain. The tender shoots were just peeking out of the ground, covered in glistening morning dew. Using a small hoe, I gathered half a basketful. Just as I was preparing to head down the mountain, the sky suddenly turned dark and gloomy. Mountain rain always comes without warning. A heavy downpour suddenly started pelting down, with nowhere to seek shelter. I was quickly soaked to the skin. To make matters worse, thick fog rose rapidly from the valley, completely blocking the path back. I was lost. If only I had moved into the Gu estate earlier, maybe I could have avoided this rain. We are practically strangers. I wonder if Zhou Huanchao would come to find me. Out of respect for the Gu family, muttering to myself, I walked through the misty rain for a long time. Suddenly, I heard someone calling my name, calling Tian Tang. Through the rain, the shouts broke through the sound of the rain. His tone was filled with an urgency I had never heard before. That usually slow-paced man, who normally couldn't even lift a rod, was now calling my name. At this moment, he was shouting my name at the top of his lungs, as if his very life depended on it. I looked toward the sound. Zhou Huanchao was already completely drenched. His light-colored robe was covered in mud stains. His hair was messy, clinging to his pale, bloodless face. He looked utterly disheveled. When he saw me, he froze. Then he stumbled and rushed to my side. He pulled me tightly into his arms, though his fingertips were freezing. His embrace was extraordinarily strong. He held me so tightly I could barely breathe.
Tian Tang, why did you run off like this? There are wild beasts and venomous snakes in the forest, not to mention all kinds of traps. If anything had happened to you, what would I do? How would I? How would I account to the Gu family?
Zhou Huanchao's fingers were trembling, though I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from fear. Qingju was waiting at the foot of the mountain with the carriage. Once we got in, Zhou Huanchao pulled a clean outer robe from a hidden compartment. He draped it over my shoulders without taking no for an answer. His own clothes were still soaking wet, with water dripping down from his hair, yet he didn't seem to notice at all. You're soaking wet yourself. Before I could finish, he reached out and pulled me toward him. My back was pressed against his chest, wet fabric pressed against wet fabric, and his body heat seeped through the thin layers. It was warm.
Don't move. We'll warm up faster this way.
The carriage swayed as it moved along. His arm was wrapped around my waist, and his chin rested on my head. His breath fell softly onto my hair, tickling me with every exhale. Zhou Huanchao.
Yes?
Thank you for coming to find me in the rain, rushing out like this. Weren't you afraid of worsening your illness?
I was.
Then why did you come? He tightened his embrace slightly. His voice was very soft, like the misty rain drifting outside the window.
I was more afraid of you being left alone in the mountains, scared.
That night, I came down with a fever. Through my hazy consciousness, I could see a figure moving back and forth beside my bed. A cool, damp cloth was repeatedly placed on my forehead. Spoonfuls of bitter medicine were fed into my mouth. I had no sense of taste. I only felt a burning discomfort in my throat. Later, it became difficult to feed me the medicine. My teeth were clenched so tightly that the spoon couldn't pry them open at all. In my daze, someone gently cradled the back of my neck, lifting my head slightly. A cool, soft touch gently brushed across my lips. It was a clean piece of cotton, soaked in warm medicine, gradually moistening my lips. The bitter liquid slowly trickled down my throat. My tongue tasted the bitterness of the medicine, but also a faint, lingering sweetness. It was the taste of candied fruit. In my feverish state, I felt his breath very close to my cheek. It was warm, mingled with the uniquely crisp, clean scent he carried. I couldn't help but call out, Zhou Huanchao. His hand, which had been dabbing my lips, suddenly stopped. The cotton paused in place, before resuming its motion. Only this time, it was even slower and gentler than before, as if he were afraid of breaking a rare and precious treasure. My fever was severe, and my eyelids were too heavy to open. I only remembered the medicine trickling in drop by drop, along with his breath close at hand. quietly slipping down my throat. It wasn't until the third day that my fever finally broke. When I woke up in the morning, Zhou Huanchao was sitting on a stool by my bed, holding a bowl of porridge in his hand. There were dark circles under his eyes, showing he hadn't slept for many nights.
You're awake.
His voice was so raspy, it was barely audible. You.
Eat some porridge. Open up. Let me feed you.
I held my breath and took a sip, suddenly remembering something. I looked up. Zhou Huanchao. Yeah? These past few days, who was the one feeding me the medicine? His fingers trembled slightly.
Qingju brewed it.
I was asking, who poured it into my mouth? He didn't answer. He just turned his head and coughed several times. For a moment, I was left completely speechless. He turned his face away and spoke softly.
While you were unconscious, you kept calling out for Gu Yanzhi.
Did I?
Yes. You said to have him come pick you up. You said you two were betrothed, and that he should thank me properly for looking after you.
He spoke very softly, as if he were talking about an insignificant trifle, but his knuckles holding the bowl were turning white. I have troubled you at the Zhou estate for too long. He indeed should thank you properly. I lowered my head guiltily.
Eldest Miss Tian, have you ever considered that Gu Yanzhi might not come at all?
I clutched the blanket tightly. How could I not have thought about that? From the moment the back door of the GU residence shut in front of me, I had already thought about it. I stayed at the Zhou estate for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, until a whole month had passed, and Gu Yanzhi hadn't sent back a single word. I had thought about it too, when tossing and turning at night, unable to sleep, running my fingers over the marriage contract in my robe. I had thought about it long ago, but I didn't have the courage to follow that thought to the end. After all, if he didn't show up, I would have nothing left in this life, neither a family nor a place to belong, not even an identity. I had thought about it. Zhou Huanchao stared into my eyes.
If he truly breaks his promise, you can stay at the Zhou estate for as long as you like.
But in what capacity? I asked myself in return. A girl pushed onto someone else by her fiancé. Just how long could she stay? He fell silent. In whatever capacity you wish. As long as you are willing to stay. I remained silent, only because I didn't know how to answer. I held that marriage contract, which still pressed hard against my chest, reminding me that I was the future daughter-in-law of the Gu family, by our parents' command, and the matchmaker's contract. This was something that could not be changed. But why was my heart beating in such a frantic panic? From then on, I deliberately avoided him. I was supposed to be Gu Yanzhi's future bride. Yet I was staying by Zhou Huanchao's side without any proper status. This thought was like a thorn in my chest. It hurt at the slightest touch. I deliberately moved to the guest room furthest from him and no longer shared a table with him during meals. Those gifts delivered by Qingju were all sent back. In less than half a month, Zhou Huanchao finally showed up. He stood at the door, holding a bowl of medicinal soup. He neither entered nor left.
Miss Tian,
Is there something you need?
the medicine has gone cold.
Have a servant reheat it.
The servants don't make it sweet when they reheat it.
To think such an elegant gentleman could actually act so shamelessly. I quietly held my breath, stepped forward, and took the bowl of medicine. I placed the reheated medicine on the stone table and was about to leave.
You are avoiding me.
His tone was absolute, not a question. Zhou Huanchao suddenly grabbed the corner of my sleeve. I am not.
Then why did you refuse the fabrics I prepared? Why did you move? Why won't you even look at me anymore?
I parted my lips, but not a single word came out.
Tian Tang.
He stood up, softly calling my name. His voice was low, and he pressed closer with every step.
Tian Tang. What are you actually afraid of?
I pushed him away, turned around, and ran back to my room, quickly slamming the door shut. But the whisper he left behind still reached my ears with absolute clarity.
Tian Tang. You can't run away from this.
Zhou Huanchao didn't show his face for another half-month. Yet, I felt uneasy the entire time. I also had no idea when exactly Gu Yanzhi would come to pick me up. At dusk, Qingju came over and said,
Miss Tian, my master is at Fan Tower. He specifically sent me to invite you. The braised pork shoulder there is very famous. It is sweet but not greasy, rich and savory. Truly the most delicious meat in the world.
I had never tasted it before, and my mouth was already watering at the thought. After a brief hesitation, I eventually got into the carriage. The private room was booked on the second floor. Zhou Huanchao had ordered a whole table of delicacies, yet he barely touched any of it. He just sipped his tea in a refined manner, watching me When the plate of braised pork shoulder was served, my eyes lit up instantly. The glossy reddish skin looked incredibly tender, falling apart at the mere touch of a chopstick. Just as I was about to dig in, a burst of laughter suddenly came from the adjacent room.
Haha. Brother Yanzhi, I must say, you really are the clever one. You've been enjoying yourself in the pleasure quarters for months, and dumped that fiancé of yours from the countryside onto Zhou Huanchao.
My chopsticks froze in midair. Zhou Huanchao's hand also paused as he raised his teacup. Why bring her up for no reason? That was Gu Yanzhi speaking.
A country bumpkin. My father insisted on forcing me to take responsibility, babbling on about repaying some life-saving favor.
His tone was laced with pure disdain.
To this day, I don't even know what she looks like. Zhou Huanchao and I were classmates for years. He is physically weak but always puts on airs. Dumping this burden on him is just perfect. A country girl and a sickly invalid. They're a match made in heaven. What if this little burden of yours actually turns out to be quite pretty? Ha 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 ha.
The laughter was light, but it felt like a thin blade stabbing deep into my heart.
Even if she is pretty, she is still from the countryside. She could never fit into high society. With some training in etiquette, she might, at best, become a bedchamber maid. To be paired with me, the eldest young master of the Gu family, is truly her good fortune. Ha ha ha. You should just send her away as soon as possible. What is the rush? Once I've finished my imperial examinations, I'll find any excuse to send her packing. I'll throw her 5 taels of silver, which is more than enough for her to live on back in her village.
So this was the scheme young Master Gu had been harboring in his heart. I put a piece of the pork shoulder into my mouth and chewed it slowly. The skin was indeed tender, and the meat fell apart easily. I took another piece, then a third. By the time I reached the 4th piece, a drop of water suddenly fell onto the back of my hand. Hot drops fell, one after another. Zhou Huanchao. Why does this meat taste saltier the more I chew? Zhou Huanchao poured a cup of hot tea for me.
If you can't swallow it, then don't eat it.
I sniffed and stuffed a 5th piece of meat into my mouth. It is delicious. This meat really satisfies my cravings. He looked at me, pulled a handkerchief from his sleeve, and handed it over. It was folded neatly. Zhou Huanchao spoke in a very soft voice.
Miss Tian, he has never seen you with his own eyes. If he were to see you, he would surely be very hurt.
After returning home from Fan Tower, I stayed awake the entire night. As the first light of dawn appeared, I took out the marriage certificate that I had carried with me for so long from my coat, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my sleeve. My pride would not allow me to shamelessly cling to this any longer. The small side gate of the Gu residence remained just as it was. The snobbish doorman pulled the gate open, a mocking sneer playing on his face.
Yo? What wind blew you here? Did living in the Zhou family's grand estate become uncomfortable? I want to call off the engagement. I handed over the marriage certificate.
The look on his face froze. I will not see Gu Yanzhi. Tell him I no longer want this marriage. Have him write a letter of annulment, stamp it with his personal seal, and give me 5 taels of silver as compensation. After this, we owe each other nothing. I waited for about the time it takes to burn a stick of incense. The moment the side gate opened again, a purse was tossed out, landing in the muddy puddle below the steps. It splashed mud all over my skirt. Then, another piece of paper fluttered down into the puddle.
The master has spoken. Since Miss Tian wishes to exchange the marriage certificate for money, he will certainly grant your wish. From now on, we shall go our separate ways. Please refrain from coming to the Gu residence in the future, Miss Tian, lest you ruin our young master's reputation.
The gate slammed shut, making the same heavy, dull sound as before. I bent down and pulled the letter of annulment out of the muddy water. Inside the purse was exactly 5 taels of silver. The amount was correct, not a single coin more. I rubbed my eyes, turned around, and walked away with long strides. This time, I did not look back. Zhou Huanchao was not at home. Qingju saw me looking lost and said,
The young master went to the palace to pay his respects. An old physician from the imperial palace just arrived. After all, the most favored noble consort is our master's aunt. The noble consort pleaded for a long time, before the elderly physician agreed to examine him. Perhaps this time the young master will truly recover.
I asked absent-mindedly, what time will the young master return home?
We must wait until the sun sets.
At dusk. Then I'm afraid I won't be able to see him. I placed the 5-tael silver ingots on his desk. After some thought, I wrote a quick note. Brother Zhou, thank you for your care. I am returning the money to you to repay your kindness for letting me stay these past few days. Farewell forever. Written by Tian Tang. The moment I stepped out of the Zhou estate, willow catkins filled the air, blowing right into my face. Just like when I first entered the city. Only back when I first arrived, I carried a marriage certificate in my coat. But now, as I departed, my hands were completely empty. Leaving the capital, I boarded a boat carrying grain. We headed south. The boatman asked where I was going. I thought through all the possibilities in my mind, but gave no answer. My parents were no longer in the countryside, and the old house had long been abandoned. I had traveled 1,000 miles to Bianjing, hoping to find a home, never imagining that it was no home at all, but only a person standing by a side gate, watching my dignity fall into the mud. The boat traveled along the waterway, the shadows of the mountains on both banks quietly receding. Closing my eyes, that white-clad figure emerged in my mind. Zhou Huanchao. I didn't know. Did Qingju brew his medicine on time? I wonder if anyone gives him sweetmeats when he drinks his bitter medicine. Anyone was there to offer him candied fruits. I wasn't sure if when he coughed and wheezed in the middle of the night, anyone got up to hand him warm water. I didn't dare miss him. Whenever I thought of him, my chest would tighten. He was a young master from a noble family, with a prestigious status, someone the noble consort had personally summoned to the palace. And who was I? Just a village girl whose betrothal had been broken, with mud staining the hem of my skirt, and nothing to my name but a letter of annulment. We were worlds apart. I shouldn't have been thinking about him. Yet, in the deep of the night whenever I closed my eyes, I would always dream of Zhou Huanchao lying in the carriage, drenched from head to toe, with his arms wrapped around my waist. His voice back then had been as gentle as a breeze sweeping across a spring lake.
I was more worried that you would be frightened all alone in the mountains.
I traveled along the river, stopping and starting, relying on the medical skills my father had taught me. Occasionally, I would do odd jobs at medicine shops along the way to earn some travel money, but the moment I stopped, I would always remember those eyes that gleamed with a cold light. Only by keeping myself busy with work could I stop my mind from wandering. After drifting around for over half a year, I managed to save a small jar of copper coins, which felt like enough to put a new window in the old house. In the end, I returned to my hometown. When I saw the old elm tree at the entrance of the village from afar, my eyes welled up with tears. Several aunties spotted me and stood up all at once.
Tangor is back.
One of the aunties grabbed my arm, her face beaming with a wide smile.
Haha. You silly girl. Why didn't you send word ahead?
Send word about what?
About your betrothed, of course. Oh my, he is a rare catch. Hard to find even with a lantern. He came to our village some time ago and said he was your fiancé and that he wanted to rebuild your courtyard. He had bricks and timber shipped in and hired the best masons from the nearby towns to personally oversee the work. It took them a full 20 days to build it. Not only did he rebuild the courtyard, but he also handed out gifts to every single household in the neighborhood. Mung bean cakes, fruit syrups, cotton gins, and clothing fabrics. He was incredibly generous. The young man is very handsome, though his health seems a bit frail. He speaks in a calm, unhurried manner and is extremely polite.
My legs suddenly froze in place. Then, where is he now?
Right in your own courtyard. The new courtyard was just finished, and he said he would stay there to wait for you. Everyone told him you hadn't returned home yet, but he just smiled and said you would definitely come back, so he has been waiting there.
And indeed, standing there now was a brand new courtyard. Gray bricks and black tiles, white walls and latticed windows. The courtyard walls were covered in climbing roses, which happened to be in full bloom. The courtyard gate was half open. I stopped outside, my heart pounding, even harder than it did when I was running all this way. Stepping through the gate, I saw a crabapple tree planted in the courtyard, its branches heavy with blossoms. Beneath the tree was a rocking chair, and leaning back in it was a man. Sensing someone's presence, he turned his head. His features were as handsome as ever, though he looked thinner than before. When Zhou Huanchao saw me, he didn't stand up, nor did he say much. He simply curled his lips into a smile and spoke in a gentle tone.
Long time no see.
Beside his rocking chair stood another one, brand new and empty, as if waiting for someone to take a seat. I stood frozen at the entrance, and tears streamed down my face in an instant. Only then did he stand up. He slowly strolled over to me, pulling a silk handkerchief from his sleeve and holding it out. It was still folded perfectly neat. Zhou Huanchao. My voice was so quiet, only I could hear it. Why are you here?
To wait for you.
How did you know for sure that I'd come back? He looked up at me. The sunlight filtered through the crabapple blossoms, pooling into a soft warmth in his eyes.
Because this is your home. Wherever you are, I am willing to wait for you.
We held our wedding right here in the village. There was no grand bridal procession like in the capital, nor was there a room overflowing with betrothal gifts. Our neighbors all pitched in to help. Several large square tables were set up in the courtyard, and the kitchen fire burned from morning till night. Braised pork, sweet and sour fish, and stewed chicken were served in an endless stream. My red bridal gown was handmade by Auntie Jiang from next door. She gently stroked the fine silk that Zhou Huanchao had specially brought.
Oh, how beautiful, how beautiful. In all my years, I've never seen such exquisite fabric.
I sat quietly in front of the mirror, listening to her chant traditional blessings as she combed my hair. First comb for a lifelong bond, second comb for hair to turn white together. The reflection in the mirror showed delicate features, framed by the vibrant red wedding gown, blushing with bridal shyness. Our ceremony was held under the crabapple tree. Zhou Huanchao had also changed into his matching wedding robes. Under the warm red glow, his complexion finally seemed a bit healthier.
First, bow to heaven and earth. Second, bow to the parents.
Where the elders would have sat, my parents' memorial tablets were placed.
Husband and wife, bow to each other.
I bowed my head, my red bridal veil swaying gently. I saw him bowing too, peeking at me through the gap in the fabric. He flashed me a playful smirk.
My darling.
This whispered endearment made my entire face flush crimson. Our bridal chamber was set in the sun-facing side room. Stepping inside, I saw a pair of red candles lit by the window, and a plate of sweet fruits on the bedside table. Outside, the moonlight was cool and crisp, and the sweet scent of crabapple drifted into the room through the cracks. I wrapped my arms around his neck. Zhou Huanchao, has your health fully recovered? He let out a soft chuckle, resting his forehead against mine. Our breaths mingled in the quiet room. Why don't you find out for yourself, my wife? The candle flames flickered, and our hearts surrendered to love tonight. After staying in the countryside for over half a year, Zhou Huanchao suggested it was time to return to Bianjing.
I still owe you a grand wedding in the capital.
He stood in the courtyard, gazing thoughtfully into the distance.
A grand carriage to welcome you, and every proper custom observed. I want everyone in Bianjing to know that you are the wife I, Zhou Huanchao, have officially wed.
The journey back to the capital took a full 2 months. Zhou Huanchao chose not to ride a horse, insisting instead on squeezing into the carriage with me. Qingju whispered to me,
Madam, the young master is just afraid. He won't be able to see you if the carriage curtain separates you.
sitting side by side like this. He only had to turn his head to look at me. As we arrived at the Zhou estate, the servants bowed in unison.
Greetings, madam. We wish the young mistress peace and endless blessings.
The main hall was filled with all kinds of candied fruits and pastries. My voice sounded a bit tense as I spoke. Weren't you worried that I might never come back? In the sweet-scented room, he turned to look at me, gently playing with my fingers.
I was. But I was more worried that if you did return one day, you'd have nowhere to go.
The sky was painted with crimson clouds, and festive music filled the air. The streets of the capital were as lively and bustling as New Year's Day. The pedestrians on the roadside all stuck their heads out to watch. When the wedding carriage reached the bustling market, I lifted a corner of the curtain. The young maids on their way home held their baskets and waited by the carriage window. They not only threw wine and fresh flowers, but also kept trying to ease my nervousness. After the ceremony, I was escorted into the bridal chamber. The matchmaker and the attendants shared a laugh and left one after another. I sat quietly by the bedside, covered in the red veil. I heard the door open and then close tightly again. The sound of footsteps drew closer. A pair of tall black boots came to a stop in front of me. The scale beam lifted the veil. The light and shadows of the red canopy cast down upon me. I looked up and happened to lock eyes with those deep, dark pools. Huanchao was dressed in bright red wedding robes. As the firelight illuminated him, his face looked a bit more down to earth than usual.
My lady.
He whispered softly. He was just about to sit down right next to me. Suddenly, a commotion broke out outside the door. The servant's voice was kept extremely low.
Young masters, our master and mistress need to rest. This is not the place to.
The door was pushed open with force. A crowd of wealthy young masters, led by Gu Yanzhi, blocked the doorway. He raised his head. His gaze pierced through the crowd, fixing straight on my face. He looked as if his soul had been snatched away.
Huanchao, you did a poor job with this. You didn't invite me to such an important occasion as your wedding. I only found out about it from others.
He took off his accessory and pretended to be magnanimous.
But I didn't take it to heart. I've brought the wedding gift money just the same.
Zhou Huanchao's expression turned icy cold, and his tone sank along with it.
Then thank you.
Gu Yanzhi lowered his head and chuckled softly. He said teasingly,
It is too simple for just you to say thank you. You should have your wife say it too.
Zhou Huanchao's fist hidden behind his back was already clenched tight. This was a sign that he was about to lose his temper. I wanted to soothe him, but instead, he grabbed my hand in a tight grip, giving him a quick glance, and quickly pulled away. I then gracefully bowed to Gu Yanzhi to greet him. With a faint smile, I said, My respects to you, young Master Gu. I am Tian Tang, the wife of the Zhou family. Thank you, young Master Gu, for bringing us our wedding gift.
Tian Tang, yes.
My name is Tian Tang. Tian Tang from Tian family village. Gu Yanzhi's lips trembled, and the color slowly drained from his face.
Tian family village, Tian Tang. But she is clearly my fiancé.
He didn't dare to finish his sentence because Zhou Huanchao was tightly holding my hand. His fingertips were still icy cold, yet his grip was incredibly firm. Gu Yanzhi stared at our intertwined hands, and a muffled sound escaped from his throat, as if he were being strangled.
How did it turn out like this?
Gu Yanzhi didn't stay for the banquet at all. As he turned and stepped out of the main gate, his steps faltered, and he almost took a nasty fall. The next day, Qingju told me, after young Master Jiyu left the Zhou family courtyard, he stood in front of that stone statue for a full hour. As the cold wind whipped across his face, he suddenly swung his hand and slapped himself hard across the face. It was so loud that even the gatekeepers heard it clearly. Upon returning to the Gu family mansion, he spent the night selling off all the servants in the house. Not a single one was spared, especially the one who guarded the side gate. Gu Yanzhi began to appear frequently in my line of sight. First, he sent a visiting card through an intermediary, which Zhou Huanchao promptly sent back. Then, he loitered outside the restaurant, watching from afar as Zhou Huanchao fed me meat dishes. Later, he frantically spent money to send gifts, pearls, fine silks, or luxurious jewelry, all of which I returned without exception. Zhou Huanchao didn't say anything on the surface, but he simply stationed more guards in front of our mansion. He even told Qingju to stay close to me whenever I went out, but I could tell he was troubled. After all, he became extremely clingy late at night.
My lady.
He hugged my slender waist from behind. His chin rested on my shoulder.
That Gu fellow was lurking around again today.
Oh, how did you know?
My servant told me.
You actually had your men watch me?
Not to watch you.
He leaned close to my ear, his tone a bit muffled.
It is to guard against that brat. Look at you. You know what kind of look I hate the most.
He didn't reply. He reached out and gently held my shoulders, then lowered his head to softly kiss my forehead. His movements carried a hint of grievance and insecurity. His eyes were filled with a fragile fear of losing me. Startled by his sudden tenderness, I reached out and gently hugged him back. Zhou Huanchao, you aren't jealous, are you? He didn't deny it. The firelight reflected in his eyes, revealing a desire I had never seen before.
You are not allowed to see him from now on.
What if he insists on looking for me?
Tell him to come straight to me.
You're practically made of medicine jars. What could you possibly do to him? The corner of his mouth twitched, but he gave no answer. Instead, his fingers tightened, clasping firmly around my waist. The lamp wick burned down. In the middle of the night, the bed curtains trembled incessantly. In my hazy state of consciousness, I heard him whispering softly by my ear. His voice was extremely low, as if he were talking to himself.
You are the treasure I risked half my life to protect. I will never let anyone hurt you.
Gu Yanzhi finally couldn't hold back anymore. He stopped sending letters through others and waited stubbornly at the main gate of the Zhou estate. He stood there from dawn until sunset. Only then did Zhou Huanchao send someone to lead him inside. When Gu Yanzhi entered the room, he was still shivering from the cold. Seeing me sitting close to Zhou Huanchao, holding a warm bowl of salted pork and bamboo shoot soup, his steps faltered.
Zhou, brother Zhou, Lady Tian.
She is Mrs. Zhou.
Zhou Huanchao corrected coldly. Gu Yanzhi exhaled sharply and pulled a contract out from his sleeve. The paper was filled with words about his willingness to reconcile and his desire to marry the daughter of the Tian family. After Zhou Huanchao finished reading it, he casually pressed the paper onto the table.
Brother Guy, what kind of play are you putting on now?
I want to marry Lady Tian as my wife.
She was already betrothed to me.
I understand, but my agreement with her came first.
Agreement.
Zhou Huanchao's voice suddenly turned icy. He also pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and laid it flat on the tea table. The paper had already yellowed, with a deep crease right down the middle and a dark ink smudge from water damage. It was the letter of annulment signed by Gu Yanzhi himself.
Brother Guy, you wrote this, didn't you? And this is your thumbprint, right? Both parties agree to annul the betrothal. Henceforth, Our marriages and lives shall have nothing to do with each other. Signed by Gu Yanzhi.
He set the discarded paper down and looked up.
Brother Gi, do you not even remember the proof you wrote with your own hand?
Gu Yanzhi's lips trembled uncontrollably. He suddenly raised his head, his eyes bloodshot.
Zhou Huanchao, I treated you as a brother. How could you plot against your own brother like this? A friend's woman is not to be touched. Did you read all those sacred books for nothing?
A friend's wife.
Zhou Huanchao let out a cold, faint laugh. His smile was extremely cold.
When you first entrusted her to me, did you ever ask if she was willing? When you made her wait by your side gate for most of the day, did it ever cross your mind that she was your betrothed wife? When you had someone throw that marriage contract into the mud, did you ever foresee that you would regret it one day?
He stood up and stopped in front of Gu Yanzhi. The two were of similar height. Zhou Huanchao's face was still very pale, but in his eyes, there was a ruthlessness that Gu Yanzhi had never seen before.
Gu Yanzhi, I gave you a chance. For a whole half a year. You were the one who didn't take it seriously. How can you blame me now for stepping in and taking her?
Gu Yanzhi left. His steps were light and hollow as he departed, like a great tree that had been uprooted from the soil. Not long after, Zhou Huanchao took me to Fan Tower to eat beef tendon. It was still that room on the second floor. When the dish was served, the reddish-brown skin and meat were practically trembling. I picked up a piece with my chopsticks. A sudden commotion broke out in the private room next door. It sounded like a teapot being smashed, and someone was slamming the table. Others were trying to persuade him.
Forget it, Brother Yanzhi. She is just a weak woman. Why bother?
What do you know?
The voice belonged to Gu Yanzhi. It was dry and raspy, like stone scraping against the ground.
Have you ever seen the way she smiles? There is a dimple on her left cheek, only on the left. Have any of you seen it? She has 2 little canine teeth, and she loves wearing green clothes, paired with an amber-colored glass hairpin. She is so beautiful. She was supposed to belong to me. She was supposed to be my wife. She was supposed to be my wife.
She is just a country girl. Even if she is pretty, how pretty could she possibly be?
Before the speaker could finish, the dull sound of a fist hitting flesh rang out. Chairs and tables overturned, and plates shattered. Immediately after, the door to our private room was pushed open. He had a bruised eye, and blood was trickling from the corner of his mouth. His gray robe was covered in spilled wine. He looked up and met my gaze. In an instant, everything stood still. It was as if he had so much to say, but in the end, only a hoarse tian escaped his lips, and he could not utter another word. I put down my bamboo chopsticks, stood up, and took Zhou Huanchao's hand. Husband, the meat has gone cold. I have lost my appetite. I want to go home. Zhou Huanchao was startled at first, but then he smiled. His smile curved up the corners of his eyes, like a rooster that had just won a fight. The grip of his hand on mine tightened slightly, and his thumb gently rubbed the back of my hand.
My wife is absolutely right. We shall head back now.
We left the restaurant side by side. Behind us came the sound of Gu Yanzhi sinking heavily back into his chair, followed by a very faint sigh.
Tian.
I did not turn around. When Gu Yanzhi set off to leave the capital, he had someone deliver a letter. I did not open it, but handed it directly to Zhou Huanchao. After reading it, he folded the paper into a paper crane and casually left it by the windowsill. Don't you have anything to say? He turned his face to look at me.
There is nothing worth saying. It is nothing more than some words of regret. What is the use of apologizing now? Are we supposed to keep these as evidence to present before a magistrate in court?
Outside, the begonia tree rustled in the wind. Zhou Huanchao. Thank you. He squeezed my hand tightly and pressed it against his cheek. In my palm, his warmth felt much hotter than usual. The paper crane on the windowsill trembled slightly in the breeze, finally falling into an ignored corner. In the blink of an eye, spring arrived again. The spring bamboo shoots on Mount Kipping were sprouting. I stayed in the courtyard, watching Qingju pack the baskets we would need for going into the mountains. A glimmer of hope in my eyes. Zhou Huanchao leaned in close to me.
Do you want to go?
No need to hide it. Actually, I really do. He turned his face to look at me, his gaze deep and tender, as he gently placed his palm on my pregnant belly.
Once the baby is born and you've recovered a bit, I'll go with you.
I gave him a quick, quiet kiss on the cheek. Understood, you'd better keep your word. He was dazed for a moment, and then he smiled. We walked side by side in the courtyard. He walked slowly, but his steps were steady, no longer like the man in the past who couldn't even hold a fishing rod tight. I held his hand tightly. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against mine. The sunlight fell onto our shoulders through the trellis, warming my heart. May the wind stay quiet, the flowers never wither, and everything go our way.